President Carter, it's good to have you on Democracy Now!
Well, thank you, Amy. It's good to be with you and your millions of viewers and listeners.
Well, you've written a new book. It's called We Can Have Peace in the Holy Land, a plan that will work. What is that plan?
Well, the plan is a diametric opposite from what is the trend now by Israel in the West Bank, and that is to make one state, one nation, all the way from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. And that is the two-state solution, which is generally adopted by the United States government, the roadmap for the international community, the United Nations resolutions, and also unanimously by the all 22 Arab nations. That is a two-state solution based on Israel's withdrawal, basically to the 1967 borders, the sharing of Jerusalem and so forth. And that's been spelled out and accepted for a long time. And so I think that the plan that I outline in my book is one that has practical aspects of modification of the basic two-state solution that both sides can accept overwhelmingly. One of the key issues would be to leave about half of the Israeli settlers in Palestine where they are, that is those nearest to Jerusalem, and swap them an equivalent amount of land, say acre for acre, to be used for a corridor, a narrow corridor between the West Bank and Gaza, about 35 miles distance. And that could be used to make a train route or either a highway, still to be controlled by Israel security. I discussed this particular plan with Ariel Sharon in January of 2005, and he agreed with me completely on it.
President Carter, the Israeli attack on Gaza, do you think it set back hopes for peace now?
In a way, I think it was a completely unnecessary war. I wrote an editorial for the Washington Post accordingly, because it could have been avoided easily. But in the long term, it may actually produce a more enthusiastic move toward a comprehensive settlement. In that, for the first time really in a long time, maybe forever, the European countries have been directly involved in trying to bring about an accommodation. The President of France, Sarkozy, has been over there. The Prime Minister of Great Britain, Gordon Brown, has been over there. And the European Union leaders have been over there to work with the Egyptians, who have been negotiating for a number of months now between Israel and Hamas, for instance, to bring about a permanent ceasefire. What Hamas wants is just to have an open supply, an adequate supply of food and water and fuel and medicine to go into the 1.5 million Palestinians who are imprisoned basically within Gaza. And what the Israelis want is an end of Hamas rockets and mortar fire. So those two things can be worked out. So I think it may be that this horrendous attack on Gaza will precipitate a more enthusiastic move toward a comprehensive peace agreement.
You say that it could have been avoided. You actually met with Hamas in December. We interviewed Robert Pastor on our broadcast, who went with you. Can you talk about how you think this attack could have been avoided?
Well, I went over there first in April, and I met with the leaders of Israel and Fatah and Egypt and Syria and Hamas. And in the past, Hamas has insisted on a ceasefire only if it included the West Bank. And Israel was adamantly opposed to that. So I induced Hamas to accept a ceasefire just for Gaza. And the Egyptians negotiated that, and it began the 19th of June. And it lasted for 6 months. When toward the end of that period, obviously it was breaking down. So I went back to the area and met with the Hamas leaders, and they said that they would have a complete ceasefire if Israel would just restore an adequate amount of supplies to the people in Gaza. I couldn't go to the West Bank, but Robert Pastor, whom you interviewed, and also Herrera Balian, who's in charge of the peace program for the Carter Center, went to Israel and asked the Israeli Defense Department leaders, if they would agree to that. And the answer came back the next day that they would only supply 15%, about 1/6 of the supplies that the people in Gaza needed. So that meant that the ceasefire could not be renewed, and it precipitated rocket fire from Gaza and the attack on Gaza by the Israelis.
The prosecutor, the ICC prosecutor's office, has said that the International Criminal Court at The Hague, the prosecutor for it, has launched a preliminary analysis to establish whether Israel committed war crimes in its offensive against Gaza. Documents also show the Palestinian National Authority has recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC in a move designed to allow investigations of alleged crimes in the Palestinian territories. What are your thoughts about this?
I don't believe that Israel has accepted the authority of the International Criminal Court, so it may be a moot effort. But I think that if the Palestinians can prevail in having an assessment made, then that might clear the air. But I don't think there's any chance of the International Criminal Court imposing any sort of penalties on Israel.
Do you think Israeli leaders should be tried?
No, I don't. I don't think that would be fruitful. I think it would be a mistake to make a move of this kind. But I do hope that there will be a complete revelation of what has occurred, and that's why I've been involved. That's why I've written an op-ed piece for the Washington Post, and that's why I'm talking to you. I think that out of this whole debacle or horrible catastrophe that's occurred to the 1.5 million folks in Gaza, that a new momentum can be generated, particularly with a new president in the White House and a superb new envoy or negotiator that will lead toward a peace agreement.
President Obama has yet to really talk about the Jewish settlements. The Jewish settlements are a major obstacle to a two-state solution. What is your assessment of the Obama administration and where they stand?
Well, I think that Obama has made an unprecedented move of an aggressive nature toward a peace agreement in the Middle East that escaped his predecessors in recent years, and that is he started working on the Mideast peace problem the first day he was in office, and he's appointed an envoy who is both superbly qualified as a mediator and knows the area quite well, and also is fairly balanced between Israel and its neighbors, or neutral, and that's what's required. In fact, George Mitchell has already been condemned by some of the Jewish American organizations because he is neutral or balanced, which has not been the case with the previous envoys. I was neutral or balanced back 30 years ago when I negotiated between Sadat and Begin and brought a peace agreement. And you have to look at both sides in order to have any sort of peace proposals that have a chance to be accepted by both sides.
But this issue of not mentioning the settlements, although what he has said has gone further than any president in the past.
Well, he's only been in office a few days, and I think what happened was that he made a choice of an envoy. He made it clear that this issue would be on the top of his agenda. He made calls to the leaders in the Middle East, I think the day he was inaugurated, as a matter of fact. And then he's appointed a person that can look at both sides. I think that's a very good step forward. He did condemn the suffering of the women and children and civilians in Gaza when the attack was underway. But I think he's been waiting to let George Mitchell come back from the Mideast, prepare a trip report that is to delineate what he found to be facts and what his recommendations might be before Obama makes a public statement on those issues. I think that's a wise political move for him to make.
What about what should happen in Gaza right now, President Carter, with the continued blockade?
Well, I think that what Hamas has always wanted in my dealings with them and in their public statements is just one thing, basically, and that is to open up supply routes in the closed border going into Gaza through the enormous wall that surrounds Gaza so that food and water and medicine and fuel can go into the 1.5 million people. When Israel was in control of Gaza before before 2005, the average amount of fuel and so forth going in was 750 truckloads a day for 1.5 million people. But the Israelis have never been willing to, which means that in effect the Gazans either starve to death or they have to bring in food and so forth in the tunnels that go from Gaza out into Egyptian Sinai Desert region.
Do you think cutting aid to Israel would be a way to achieve Middle East peace?
No, I don't. That has been done in a couple of occasions. I did it once when I was in office when Israel made an unwarranted invasion of Lebanon, in my opinion. And I notified the Prime Minister of Israel at the time that this violated U.S. law in that our sale of weapons to Israel was predicated on Israel using the weapons for defensive purposes only. That's the present U.S. law and was then. And so they withdrew from Lebanon under that pressure. When George H.W. Bush was in office, he witnessed the escalation of Israeli settlement building in a major settlement area between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. That's only a distance of about 6 miles, by the way. And he actually withheld several hundred millions of U.S. aid money to Israel. And then Prime Minister Shamir backed down and stopped construction on that particular settlement area under pressure from the United States and the withholding of actual funds. I think $400 million was finally withheld. And so, but as soon as George H.W. Bush went out of office, the settlement was recommenced, and it's now been basically completed. So on two occasions, that was done in the past, but I don't see that that's a fruitful way to threaten Israel with withholding of funds. We give Israel about $10 million in aid each day, and that's a lot of money. But I think we feel obligated to do it, and I wish that we would give an equivalent amount of aid to the suffering Palestinians.
Has President Obama sought out your advice on the Middle East, President Carter? You've met with him several times.
Not directly. When he heard that I was going to, I notified him that I was going to the Middle East in December, that I would be meeting with the Lebanese, who are going to have an election on the 7th of June, which the Carter Center will probably monitor. I also told him I was going to Syria, a nation with which we do not have diplomatic relations, and then I was going to meet with Hamas leaders and others. He asked me to make a report to him after I came back, which I did. So the night before the 5 presidents met in a highly publicized meeting in the Oval Office and the White House, I met with President Obama, President-elect Obama then, quite extensively. My wife was in the room taking notes, and David Axelrod was the only other person in the room taking notes. He never did comment. So just the 4 of us. And I told him about all the work of the Carter Center, and most of his questions that took up more than half the time was about the Middle East. It was at that time that I gave him the only copy of my new book that I had, which I had just read over to make sure it didn't have any mistakes in it.
Helen Thomas, who questioned you when you were president, now is questioning the 10th president that she has covered as dean of the White House Press Corps. President Obama asked President Obama, do you know of any country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons? He evaded that question.
That's interesting. Helen Thomas is one of the best reporters that ever served in the White House. She used to give me some tough questions, which I never avoided, by the way, but I noticed that later in George W. Bush's term, he did pretty well excluded Helen Thomas from the approved interrogators of him. But I think she asked some very appropriate questions.
Well, she was clearly alluding to Israel. Do you think the Middle East should be a nuclear-free zone?
I would like to see it nuclear-free. There's no doubt that Israel does have a large nuclear arsenal. This has been known ever since before I became president, and even Israeli leaders have said publicly that this is true.
President Carter, thank you very much for joining us.
I've enjoyed talking to you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.